Ladies and gentlemen, Renegades is here, and to be quite honest, it's off to a strong start, or at the very least is feeling a lot better than the Edge of Fate, though the bar was at the bottom of the ocean. Regardless, with the new expansion comes a giant heap of patch notes, so today I'm taking you through everything that changed in patch 9.5.0 Renegades as quickly and concisely as possible. And of course, if you end up finding today's video helpful and informative, then your like and subscription would be very much appreciated. So without further ado, let's begin with ability tuning. Hunters, you're up first. Both the Deadshot and Marksman Golden Gun supers have had their damage against non-boss combatants increased by 15% and 26% versus boss combatants. And just as a quick comparison, this puts a Celestial Nighthawk shot at almost the exact same damage as a Cuirass of the Falling Star Thundercrash. Furthermore, Golden Gun shots now apply Scorch intrinsically, 40 at base or 50 if using Ember of Ashes, letting you cause an ignition in just 2 shots. Lastly, the biggest change of them all, when fired from within a Well of Radiance, Golden Gun now counts as Radiant for the increased damage bonus. It only took them 3 years to do this, but hey, at least it's finally here. Sticking with Solar Hunter supers, Blade Barrage has received a pretty insane 39% damage buff versus all combatants, and if paired with Starry to Scales, actually allows it to out-damage a Cuirass Thundercrash. Pretty cool. The Proximity Explosive Knife, Weighted Knife, Lightweight Knife, and Knife Trick melee abilities have all had their damage versus red bars increased by 50% and 36% versus all other enemy classifications. And furthermore, Lightweight Knife specifically has had its crit multiplier increased from 1.3 to 1.5x. Across both Solar and Prismatic, the Acrobat Dodge class ability has had its passive energy regen rate in PvE increased by 112%, making its cooldown identical to that of Gambler's Dodge, allowing you to use it far more often than before, which is a pretty cool change. Again, across both Solar and Prismatic, the Gunpowder Gamble aspect has received a buff and a rework. Now, shooting the dynamite while mid-air causes it to deal 50% extra damage in an expanded radius and create scorching sub-munitions. And by the way, GPG does indeed scale its damage off the grenade stat and other perks like Spirit of Verity, so if you want to make some big booms, then look no further. Heading over to Void now, both the Shadowshot Deadfall and Shadowshot Mobius Quiver supers have received some pretty major changes. And starting with Deadfall, the Tether Anchor now attaches to targets that it hits, which is great for moving bosses. And second, the Weaken effect has been increased from 30% to now 35%, a first of its kind debuff that now makes Deadfall the strongest weaken source in the game. Furthermore, on impact, the tether now instantly weakens and suppresses in a wide area of effect around it before the tether even attaches to anything. Ahead of the announcement of this change, some people in the community were wondering whether internally these changes meant you could now extend the weaken effect from tether with void weakens like you can with Tractor or Felwinter's Helm. However, unfortunately, I can confirm this does not work and the tether debuff cannot be extended beyond its usual duration. Mobius Quiver has been reworked in a way that favors the use of bow weapons alongside it to massively improve their damage and of the super itself, because now firing Mobius Quiver creates a meter called Mobius Quiver on the left of your screen that does 2 things. One, dealing weapon damage fills the meter, and once full, firing another volley hugely increases the damage of it, 227% or 3.27 times base actually, and thankfully it doesn't reset, so if you were to use Orpheus Rig, you are in fact able to fire 2 high damage volleys back to back. Secondly, while the meter is full, your bow weapon damage is increased by 2.5 times, which is excellent when paired with something like Leviathan's Breath. The duration of Mobius Quiver has also been increased from 10 to 16 seconds to accommodate for this new bow damage feature, and when paired with Orpheus Rig, it now lasts for 20 seconds instead, which is plenty of time to deal a good chunk of bow damage. For more specifics, check out either the super or DPS testing videos where I go more in depth into it, but just know that this super is very solid now. Finally, we have a small change for both Void and Prismatic, and that is that your Smoke Bomb melee's lifetime after sticking to a surface has been increased from 3 seconds to 9 seconds. Arc Hunter has 2 changes. Firstly, across both Arc and Prismatic, the Storm's Edge super has had its passive energy regeneration increased by 25%, so for the 3 people who still use Storm's Edge, you're going to be getting it back a decent bit faster now. And second, Bungie have fixed an issue where the Aftershock explosion from Lethal Current would not consistently refresh combination blow stacks. But the real question is, who's still using Lethal Current in the big 2025? Stasis Hunters, you guys have had a few changes happen. For starters, the Shatter Dive aspect features a new behavior where shattering a stasis crystal or frozen target now grants frost armor, and the amount given is the maximum allowable by your build, so 5 without Whisper of Rhyme and 8 with Whisper of Rhyme. Furthermore, across both Stasis and Prismatic, the Silence and Squall super has had its damage increased by 63%, which is nice, but compared to other Hunter supers, it still isn't anything spectacular. Definitely appreciated though, the added ad clear power of it has been raised as a result. The Strand Widow's Silk aspect has been changed in a pretty major way. Now, while using this aspect, staring at a grapple tangle for about 1 second will now override your grenade ability into a non-offensive grapple, which by the way is not non-offensive as of the recording of this video. You can still grapple melee with it perfectly fine, but it's probably a bug. And by the way, this does also work with the grapple tangles created by the Navigator. Also, any grapple tangles you create near the ground will now rise into the air after a short duration, and the tangles themselves have had their lifetime increased from 15 to 20 seconds. There was also a note that says hitting an enemy with a grapple melee that wasn't free now creates a grapple tangle, which I assumed meant hitting a boss with a grapple melee which wasn't attached to a tangle point would create a grapple tangle, though that doesn't appear to be the case, and I have no idea what else it could mean. Perhaps let me know down in the comments if you do. Across both Strand and Prismatic, the Silk Strike super has had its passive energy regeneration increased by 11% and its damage resistance during PvP by 13%. Lastly, for hunters, the ammo pickup radius of Marksman Dodge has been increased from 10 meters to 15 meters. Warlocks, you're next, and we're starting with the Daybreak super, which has had its PvE damage increased by 20% and the actual sword projectiles now scorch enemies by default. Using Daybreak alongside Dawn Chorus actually allows it to output some pretty decent total damage. It was the 6th on our list from the super testing we did the other day. The Nova Warp super has been changed in a couple different ways. Now, charging up the primary detonation attack pulls in enemies towards you, and the damage of the primary detonation versus weakened combatants has been increased by 15%. Furthermore, Dark Blink now releases a cluster of weakening seekers when used. They don't do a whole lot of damage, but definitely allow for a cool new debuffing option. Vortex Nova Bomb now repeatedly pulls in enemies towards the center of it throughout its entire lifetime. Arc Warlocks, across both Arc and Prismatic, the Storm Trance super has had its maximum sustained damage bonus increased from 50 to 65%, and the Landfall Jolt duration has been raised from 10 seconds to now 16 seconds, which I think is now the longest lasting Jolt instance in the game. Similarly, Chaos Reach has been buffed by an extra 20% versus all combatants. Very nice. Here's a big one. The Ionic Sentry aspect no longer blinds the user on creation, which is such a nice quality of life change you don't even know. And actually, we just put out a build that features this and Storm Trance and is very powerful. Check it out. Another big one is this next change to the Winter's Wrath super, because the Shatter Wave damage against frozen targets has been increased by 210%, making it better than it already is for ad clear and actually not terrible for boss damage. The Needle Storm super for both Strand and Prismatic has been altered so that the needle projectiles now prioritize bosses, mini-bosses, and champions over other enemies during target selection. However, this does not mean, or at least doesn't seem like, the overall tracking strength of Needle Storm has been improved like many people hoped. Just against Carl in the range, 1 or 2 of my needles are still missing more often than not, which is a bit disappointing. Lastly, we have some general changes to Warlock Rifts, the first and most obvious being that you can now cast them while moving. This change is honestly super awesome and allows for much more fluid gameplay, and the actual radius of your standard rift has been increased from 3.75 to now 5 meters, and the grenade and melee ability recharge rate while standing within an empowering rift has been buffed by an additional 20%. Titans, you guys haven't had too much done, but there are still some interesting changes here. For starters, your throwing hammer melee ability now scales its damage depending on how far the hammer has flown before impacting the target. And pre-patch, at 50 meters, the hammer damage was 481. However, post-patch, again at 50 meters, this is now 686, an overall 43% increase. Even at a mere 10 meter gap, the damage is 564, or 17.3% higher. And Point Blank actually went and retested, and it's now sitting at 503, or 4.5% higher over base from pre-patch. Whether this is a harmless damage increase that slipped through, or a bug, I don't know. However, this definitely makes me want to try a build with Melis Panoplia. It could be pretty strong now. Void Titans have had a major change occur to the Sentinel Shield super, where now standing behind the shield periodically reloads all of your weapons every 2.5 seconds and grants Void Overshield. However, the reload portion is currently bugged and does not seem to work. Furthermore, blocking damage now extends the super's lifetime, and doing so, as well as having allies behind your shield, will charge the new shield throw meter on the left of your screen. And once full, throwing your shield will cause it to do massively increased damage. And given that it's very realistic to throw 2 or even 3 of these shields, you're going to be dishing out some serious supportive damage when using this super. However, the one catch is that the damage bonus provided to allies has been reduced from 40% to now 25%, matching base Well of Radiance, which is fine, I guess. And quick little meta commentary, I'm 99% sure this super won't be relevant in 3-man fire teams, but for 6-man stuff, it could be pretty good, though would require extensive testing to verify. Leave a a comment if you'd like to see that. Fist of Havoc, a mostly forgotten super, has been shown a little bit of love in that the heavy attack now deals more damage if you performed a light attack beforehand. Nothing major, but at least it's something. Doing only slams amounts to 13,900 damage, and then doing a mixture of lights and heavies gives around 20,000 instead, so not terrible. Lastly, for Titans, the Howl of the Storm special attack during Glacial Quake now costs 15% super energy up from the previous 5%, letting you only perform 5 attacks instead of the previous 9, effectively killing this attack in super. Finishing up with some general ability tuning that affects all 3 classes, the Suppressor Grenade no longer suppresses the user, and the detonation damage has been increased by 10%. The Spike Grenade now attaches to combatants. The Echo of Undermining Fragment now only has a -10 grenade stat penalty instead of the old -20. Echo of Provision grants +10 grenade stat now. Echo of Exchange grants +10 melee stat, and all other Void Fragments have had their negative stat penalties removed with the exception of Echo of Starvation and Echo of Persistence. Lightning Grenades now attached to combatants, and an issue with the Armamentarium was fixed where when using Touch of Thunder you could not go above 2 lightning grenades. So now you can indeed have 3 lightning grenades if you choose to do so. The Flashbang Grenade no longer blinds the user, and the detonation damage has been increased by 10%. Finally, to round out the ability tuning, we have a very welcome change, and that is that Threadlings who lose their target because either it died, teleported, or despawned will no longer explode and instead search for another combatant, which essentially guarantees that all of your Threadlings will always find their mark. Very nice indeed. Next up, we're discussing exotic weapon changes, starting with Ace of Spades. First off, the Memento Mori special rounds damage bonus has been increased from 18 to 30%. The version of Firefly that Ace of Spades has been tweaked slightly to make it more potent as well. The maximum damage has been raised from 65 to 100, the minimum from 0 to 20, the area of effect from 6 to 7.5 meters, and finally the damage fall-off no longer starts at 30% of the AoE, but rather at 50%. So basically it deals the highest damage over a larger area now, which is pretty good for an underused weapon in the space. Hawkmoon now gets a PvE damage bonus per stack of paracausal charge that you have, and to save me yapping, the exact values are on screen. However, this bonus does not apply to the final paracausal shot. The Poison Burst triggered from Osteostriga has had its internal cooldown reduced from 4 seconds down to 2 seconds, which does make it feel a little less clunky to use, but in all honesty, it should just be outright removed. Osteostriga was in fact a bit of a menace back in Witch Queen, but these days it can't hold a candle to the power creep that has since ensued. Suros Regime is now able to be special reloaded to swap between the dual speed receiver and spinning up firing modes, featuring a new hip fire reticle to indicate which mode you are in. And furthermore, spun up kills while using spinning up now grants bonus special ammo meter progress, and similarly, kills while ADS and using the dual speed receiver grant bonus heavy ammo meter progress instead, which honestly makes Suros feel pretty good. Not Destiny 1 Year 1 levels of good, but still pretty good. Small change for Revision 0 here, the Hunter's Trace rounds, aka the sniper bullets, now create a kinetic shockwave on impact that also exhausts the target, which as a reminder, exhaust is a debuff that reduces enemy outgoing damage by 25%. Touch of Malice has received a buff where the intrinsic trait now heals the user for more HP than before, and the number of kills required to trigger the healing has been reduced. In fact, it now only requires 2 kills to proc, and activating the Charged with Blight alternate fire mode also bestows the same healing impulse. And from my testing, it actually felt really solid. Symmetry has received yet another buff where this time a new behavior has been added. Now, firing dynamic charge projectiles builds bolt charge stacks, and if your stacks of dynamic charge are greater than 10, which is the effective cap for this bonus, you gain 3 bolt charges per hit. And rather conveniently, Symmetry is also able to spend the bolt charge it now generates, perfectly closing the loop. Oh, and the reload speed was increased from 15 to 35. Still Hunt, Still Hunt, Still Hunt. Still Hunt has had the damage of the Golden Gun shot when used with Celestial Nighthawk increased by 40%. And also, the Celestial Nighthawk shot works once again with the artifact perk Sniper's Meditation. And yeah, this kinda makes Still Hunt an absolute DPS demon, fully restoring it back to and even elevating it above its final shape peak. Welcome back, Still Hunt. Wither Horde has been buffed to where now the autoloading time from Silent Alarm takes 2 seconds down from the previous 3.5 seconds, as seen in the side-by-side comparison. The Chaperone now behaves exactly like a rapid-fire slug frame with regards to its damage and rate of fire profile. Izanagi's Burden, after a grueling 5.5 years of painfully slow honing times, has finally had its Season of the Worthy nerf completely undone, where now the special reload ability can once again scale with the reload speed stat and any associated reload speed scalars. Tessellation has received some pretty big big changes that make it synergize with the Transcendence ability. Now, final blows while using a prismatic subclass grant 2.5% light and dark energy, and while Transcendence is active, final blows grant additional bonus time to the meter. Additionally, while you are in Transcendence, the special reload rocket shot now deals 22.9% more damage, and doing so will also reload the magazine from reserves, and you can now special reload with 0 ammo in the mag as well. The solar variant of the catalyst now also applies 70 scorch stacks, up from 15, and the stasis variant applies 80 slow stacks instead of the previous 30, and the subclass keyword application is now near immediate. Small one here, the spread of the projectiles released from Deathbringer have been reduced, and I didn't manage to get a clip from pre-patch, but just from memory it does seem tighter than before. Black Talon's heavy attack now applies void suppression on hit, allowing it to stun overload champions, and if the target is already suppressed, the suppression will spread to any nearby targets instead. Also, its catalyst has received a change where now the damage of Black Talon is increased by 10% for every void debuff on the target, including volatile, weaken, and suppression. The heavy attack now costs 3 ammo instead of 4, the maximum reserves have been increased, and on top of all of that, they gave it the Duelist Trance trait. Deterministic Chaos has been given a new effect where releasing the trigger after a vexadecimal projectile pulls 12 rounds into the magazine from reserves, and if you keep timing it right, you can actually fire for quite a long time, which I think is a pretty cool change. Nothing meta-defining, but yeah. Worldline 0 had an issue fixed where the Tesseract attack was only hitting 1 instance of damage rather than the usual 5, and on top of that, the amount of instances has been increased from 5 to now 7. Chaining Tesseract blinks now also only cost 10% sword energy rather than the previous 20%. Wolfsbane, the exotic axe from Ashen Iron, which launched relatively weak, has been given some buffs. For starters, the damage of the light attack has been increased by 8.5%, which aligns it closer to swords like the Lament, and for comparison's sake, a light attack from Wolfsbane now deals 460 damage and 458 for the Lament, so yeah, pretty close. Second, the duration of Nano Assault has been increased from 10 seconds to 12 seconds, and the damage of the Swarm Nado by roughly 20%, plus the internal cooldown of the creation of Quicksilver Nanites is now 2 seconds down from the previous 5 seconds. Lastly, when used alongside Outbreak Perfected, the damage ramp up versus targets affected by Siva Nanites now happens slightly faster. Finally, closing out the exotic weapon changes, we have New Malpais, and with it they fixed an issue where kills with the weapon would not proc relevant artifact perks or set bonuses, aka it now properly counts as a micro-missile weapon and can trigger perks like the Ion Adapter set bonus. Also, they reduced the amount of super energy gained from the remote detonations, as you can see in the side-by-side comparison. Alright, now it's time for some exotic armor tuning, and again we're starting with Hunters and Graviton Forfeit. Graviton Forfeit now grants improved grenade, melee, and class ability recharge rates for a moderate duration each time you become invisible, and this new effect is called Vanishing Shadow, and it stacks up to 3 times. Vanishing Shadow does not deplete while you're invisible, and while you're at 3 stacks of the buff, successful triggers refresh the timer and grant a 3rd HP Void Overshield. And just from my initial impressions, this exotic honestly feels great, a super solid neutral game option for Void Hunters. Staying with Void Hunter, Omnioculus now makes it so granting Beyond the Veil to allies, aka making them invisible, now also starts their health and shield regeneration. Lucky Raspberry now always makes it so Arc Bolt Grenade hits apply Jolt, and now any application of the Jolt debuff or triggering the Jolt chains from the exotic on a target already affected by Jolt returns Arc Bolt Grenade energy. And to my surprise, it actually feels pretty good now. You literally get your full grenade back in seconds if paired with something like Lodestar. I'm definitely going to be playing around more with this to see if there's anything else there. Gemini Jesters has received a purely PvP change, so I'll make this quick. Increased disorient duration versus players from 0.5 to 1 second. The debuff now also removes affected players' HUDs for 2 seconds, and the disorient duration versus PvE combatants has been increased from 2 to 3 seconds. That's it for the Hunters. Now let's talk Titans, starting with Arbor Warden. Arbor Warden has been changed pretty heavily in Renegades to where now collecting 3 orbs of power enhances your next Barry Nade, and the enhanced Barry Nade now spawns a Y pattern of 3 of your equipped Barricade, which does work with barricade modifications like Storm's Keep, Drenger's Lash, or Bastion. And to be quite honest, this exotic is just peak whimsy. Is it practical? Hell no. Is it silly and fun? Hell yes. Dune Marchers have had their maximum chain count increased from 4 to 7, and each chain hit now grants 2 stacks of Bolt Charge or 3 when using Spark of Frequency. And furthermore, Glaive melees now also trigger the chains. Ursa Furiosa has had a bunch of changes made to it regarding the consistency of return super energy after exiting Sentinel Shield. It basically just means that whatever content you're playing in, blocking enough damage should always result in 50% of your super being returned, as evident from the clip you're seeing here of me blocking attacks in the -30 shooting range and getting back exactly 50% of my super. Second Chance has been given some new behavior. Now, shield throw final blows spawn void breaches, and collecting void breaches grants melee energy. And at 100 melee stat, it takes roughly 4 void breaches to fully refund your melee, which is okay, I guess. I was really hoping that a void breach would give around half of your melee back, but oh well. This exotic now also allows the Sentinel super shield throw to apply void weaken as well. Armamentarium now grants 10% grenade energy on every weapon final blow, and throwing a grenade will now reload your currently equipped weapon. Might find a niche in some weird damage rotation or something. Lion Rampant now allows shooting while ADS when in lift. Peacekeepers have had their hidden mobility stat increased from 25 to 30, and the ability to swap load SMGs has been re-added. Now for the Warlocks, and boy oh boy do you guys have some juice going on here, starting with Nothing Manacles. First off, a general ability change was made to the Charge Scatter Grenade, where now the projectiles track targets slightly faster than before, and then for the exotic itself, Scatter Grenade kills now spawn additional seeking projectiles, and the most important part of all of this, the effect can chain on itself, allowing it to literally clear entire rooms with a single scatter grenade. Nice to see that Controverse Hold has some competition. Next is Briarbinds, and you're now going to need fewer kills to max out the bonus damage applied to your Void Souls. In fact, it is now 4 kills, down from 6, and additionally, the Void Soul now deals more damage based on the amount of time it has been deployed on a target, up to 30% after 10 seconds of continuous damage, which is cool, but in my opinion, it's still going to be very hard to pick this exotic over the absolute powerhouses that are Controverse and Nothing Manacles. Storm Dancer's Brace, this is a big one. While Storm Trance is equipped, Arc ability hits while Amplified now grant Bolt Charge, and this includes things like Ionic Sentry or Arc Soul, and Storm Trance hits now also grant stacks of Ascending Amplitude, not just kills, making this exotic and super combo seriously strong. In fact, it dealt the highest total damage out of all the supers we tested last Tuesday. Winter's Guile has received a mountain of changes to make it more like the Titan exotic Wormgod Caress, so here's the simple version. Scoring a melee kill grants 1 stack of Warlord Sigil, up to 10 stacks. Each stack of the buff provides an extra plus 30% melee damage up to the maximum 300% at 10, and just like Wormgods, the stacks now fall off one by one instead of all at once. Furthermore, when you're at 10 stacks of Warlord Sigil, using another melee ability will activate Warlord's Rage for 10 seconds, and it's during this time you're granted an intense period of melee energy regen, faster melee speed, and an even higher melee damage bonus of 400% or 5x base. When Warlord's Rage ends, you lose all of your Sigil stacks and have to start over. However, it's quite easy to get it back up and running again, especially if you're using something like Lightning Surge, because multiple melee kills count for multiple stacks of the buff. Matiodoxia has been changed to become Warlock's equivalent of Curus of the Falling Star, as in it now buffs the damage of your Needlestorm super. As long as at least 5 projectiles from your Needlestorm impact the target, the Stylostyxis explosion from Matiodoxia will now trigger with increased potency. And actually, as of the recording of this video, Needlestorm and Matiodoxia are bugs where the Stylostyxis explosion is scaling with the grenade stat rather than the super stat, so the damage is a little inconsistent at the moment. I'll update a pinned comment when Bungie have fixed it. Finally, for Warlocks, we have Dawn Chorus, which has received 2 small changes. One is that your Daybreak damage is increased by a measly 5% while wearing it, but also the applied scorch from each attack has been increased, meaning each one will be guaranteed to cause an ignition. Now it's time for some legendary weapon tuning, starting with Micro Missile Frame Pulse Rifles, where their total reserve count has been decreased from 18 to 14. There was also a lot of custom tuning to things like bow draw time, fusion rifle charge times, but they're all incredibly minimal and unimportant. What isn't minimal is that high impact fusion rifles have had their PvE bonus damage scalar increased from 6.7% to 15%, which is not insignificant and definitely puts high impacts in a better place damage-wise. Unfortunately, rapid fire slug frame shotguns no longer gain a plus 50 RPM boost from Assault Mag and instead gain plus 8, taking them to 95 RPM. Now for some weapon perk updates, Rampage now only loses 1 stack of the buff instead of all 3, effectively tripling the lifetime of the perk, and yes, this does work for the Huckleberry. Box Breathing is now a flat 40% damage buff for all weapon types except Disruption Snipers like the new refurbished A499, where it's only 30%. The Bray Legacy Origin trait no longer allows weapon perks like Cluster Bombs to contribute to the ability energy gains. RIP Haliatus, it's been real. To compensate though, the amount of energy returned for rocket launchers specifically has been buffed from 10 to 17%. Finishing up with some miscellaneous changes, Ammo Scout mods have returned return to the game once more, which, if you weren't aware, make it so whenever you create a brick yourself, you also create it for your teammates, albeit at a smaller size for them. Finally, swapping from a loadout containing static armor charges to a loadout containing timer-based armor charge mods like fonts or surges will now completely remove any armor charge stacks you have, which, if you ask me, is a pretty dumb change, and actually I would much rather the opposite be true, where swapping from ticking to static removes your charges. Would at least make exiting a DPS phase a lot more convenient since you won't have to deal with surge bug anymore. Regardless though, that has been your patch 9.5.0 Renegades as quickly and concisely as possible without any of the fluff. This video took quite a while to put together, so I'd seriously appreciate it if you liked the video and perhaps even subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more content coming your way that I'm sure you'll find informative. Anyway, do let me know down in the comments which change has you the most excited thus far, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.